Well, China claims about 90% of the South China Sea, including ownership of the Spratly Islands, which is disputed by the Philippines, Vietnam and others. The Scarborough Shoal is claimed by China and the Philippines. That disagreement escalated 8 years ago when the Philippine Navy apprehended 8 mainland Chinese fishing vessels in the area. Well, let's discuss this further with Richard Heydarian, who's a political scientist and author of Asia's New Battlefield, U.S., China and the Struggle for Western Pacific. His via Skype from Manila. Thank you very much for being with us on Aljazeera. Before now, the U.S. had not taken sides on the territorial disputes in the South China Sea. The stakes in the region are extremely high, as we've seen. How much ammunition does this new U.S. position give to other countries that lay claim to the territory? How much does it embolden them, you think?
Yeah, we have had a lot of naysayers saying that this is nothing but a statement, it's just pure rhetoric. Others saying that this is just a cynical ploy by the Trump administration to drum up the president's numbers ahead of a very tough elections in November. But I think if you really look at the statement and compare it to previous statements, not only from the Trump administration, but from the Obama and other American administration, I think this is a major departure in terms of American policy in the South China Sea, and also has some very important, not only legal, but operational ramifications. So if you look at the language of the statement, it does not only reject as unlawful China's aggressive activities and its historic rights to much of the South China Sea and beyond, all the way to North Natuna Sea waters off the coast of Indonesia. But what it also does is that it indirectly, almost, de facto affirms the territorial claim or maritime claims of other countries. So, for instance, it mentions that China has no right to claim the Scarborough Shoal, which is claimed by the Philippines, or the Mischief Reef, or the Soikan Thomas Shoal, which it says is part of the Philippine continental shelf. So effectively, it's saying that those land features belong to the Philippines. And the ramification is important. For instance, the U.S. has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. So if it says that these land features do not belong to China, and if some of these land features are already occupied by the Philippines, and if China does something aggressive or provocative against the Philippines in those land features, then ipso facto, it will put pressure on the Pentagon to make interventions in behalf of the Philippines. This will have operational ramifications, not just empty rhetoric we're talking about here.
So you think does China have anything to fear within its sphere of influence as a result of this new position from the U.S.?
And you see, the other important thing about the statement is that it not only defends the position more or less of the Philippines. By the way, this major statement by Secretary Pompeo came out on the 4th-year anniversary of the Philippines Arbitration Award. So it's really very much invoking the Philippine Arbitration Award as final and binding. But what it did was it also indirectly confirmed or affirmed or supported the claims of other countries in the region with which it's developing strategic partnership. For instance, it more or less implied that the James Shoal, which is supposed to be the southernmost tip of the 9-dash line of China, is within Malaysian waters. So therefore, perhaps it's part of Malaysian continental shelf. It mentioned the Vanguard Bank, which is claimed by Vietnam. It falls within Vietnamese waters, but China has been doing aggressive activities there. And even more fascinating, it mentions the Natuna Sea area, whereby Indonesia and China have recently had some back and forth. So U.S. is more or less putting itself behind not only Philippines, but a number of countries in the region and projecting or showing China as the bully in the region.
Right. As Katrina mentioned, I mean, there's been an obvious escalation of tensions between Washington and Beijing over the past few months over a number of issues, the COVID-19 crisis, of course, the treatment of Uyghurs, the national security law in Hong Kong, just to name a few. Where do you see this leading to? Do you think this is a tipping point in the relationship?
Well, one thing we have to keep in mind is the political cycle here, right? I think the Chinese, America's rivals across the world, they're watching what's going to happen in November. So I think what's happening right now in the South China Sea, any kind of major policy pronouncement that the United States makes today, the question is whether a different administration after November, let's say if Joe Biden wins, which is so far the more likely outcome, will he continue the policies of Trump administration? I think, based on my understanding of what's happening in Washington, D.C. and among leading thinkers in the U.S. and around the world, it seems we're increasingly talking about a bipartisan consensus. So maybe Joe Biden will be a little bit more conciliatory in terms of rhetoric. Maybe he'll try to reach out to China on questions of climate change. Maybe he'll try to tone down the trade war when it comes to tariffs and protectionism. But I think on the South China Sea issue, there's an increasingly bipartisan consensus that something has to be done, that we have to draw the line in the sand. Otherwise, China is going to turn an international water effectively into a Chinese lake. And what's even more interesting is that even other countries who used to be quiet on China's behavior in the South China Sea, like Indonesia, are speaking out. Countries like the Philippines, who have had good relationship with China under President Duterte, are beginning to speaking up. And also Vietnam, which is now the chairman of the ASEAN, has convinced the region to make it clear that any resolution of the disputes and the negotiations of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea should be solely in accordance to the UNCLOS and international law, not China's interpretation of things, not China's alternative understanding of how these disputes should be resolved. So I think we're really entering a turning point in terms of not only U.S. and China relationship, but China's relationship with littoral states in the South China Sea and key neighbors in the region.
Thank you so much, Richard Heydarian, for talking to us about this. Richard Heydarian is a political scientist joining us there from Manila. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.